Welcome to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic is the war in the Congo. I'm talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let's start with this. What were you doing in 1994? 1994, I was a little girl. I was just playing around, living a normal life, very different from what was happening in Africa. In 1994, Rwanda was experiencing a horrific genocide in which an estimated 800,000 people, Tutsis and Hutu, were killed over a duration of approximately 100 days from April to July. The genocide was rooted in long-standing ethnic tensions between the Hutu majority and the Tutsi minority. It exacerbated by historical grievances, political power struggles, and economic issues. The aftermath of the genocide left Rwanda deeply scarred, with significant loss of life, widespread trauma, and the challenges of rebuilding a society fractured by hatred. Most of us have seen the movie Hotel Rwanda, and if you haven't, I suggest you go and watch it. This was my first introduction, particularly to Americans in my generation, as to what was happening in this part of the world. At the time, the Congo was Zaire. Thousands of refugees fled the country of Rwanda and ended up on the border of Zaire and Rwanda. But around 1996, a coalition of Rwanda Tutsi soldiers, elements of the Ugandan army, as well as Syrian rebels invaded this territory. They were known as the Alliance of Democratic Forces of the Liberation of the Congo, the ADFL. It was a rebel group that played a crucial role in the Rwandan-led invasion of Zaire in the mid-90s. The leader of the ADFL was Laurent Kabila. He led a group in overthrowing the longtime dictator Mobutu in 1997 and subsequently became the president of Zaire, then changing the name to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Kabila's leadership was marked by significant challenges, including ongoing conflict, political instability within the country. He was then assassinated in 2001, and his son, Joseph Kabila, succeeded him as president. Since then, there's been different leaders. Since the 90s through the early 2000s, 5 million people have been killed. And today we're sitting at roughly 10 million people have been killed. But what are they fighting for? Well, they're fighting for what's in your pocket right now. Your cell phone, your laptop, their minerals. Coltan, to be exact, is a mineral that is used for electronic devices such as smartphones, laptops, and all telecommunication equipment. About 80% of all coltan comes from the Congo. And the DRC is the world's largest producer of cobalt. And cobalt is primarily used in the production of rechargeable lithium-ion batteries, electric cars, smartphones, and laptops. They're also rich in copper, gold, diamonds, tin, and lithium. So why are we talking about this? For me, it's for several reasons. The number one reason is the fact that ever since I've been alive, and I'll be 41 this year, I've heard of conflict and war and people being killed in that part of the world. It's been decades and decades of murder. Then I started seeing reports that Rwanda was getting support from Hamas and Iran. And I said to myself, well, why are we not talking about this as Americans? This is not getting the same amount of attention as the Ukraine war or the Israeli war. Yet, so much of what we do every single day, so much of what we use every single day comes from this country. Well, I had to know more. So today you're going to hear a little bit of my interview with Furaha Mussanzi. Furaha was originally from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. She moved to Bradford 22 years ago as a refugee. She holds a master in African peace and conflict studies and has dedicated her energy to managing the Millside Center, supporting vulnerable individuals like refugees and domestic abuse victims. I have a lot of questions for her and I cannot wait to dive in. But first, we've got to hit a few current events. Up first, speaking of Ukraine, Ukraine has agreed to a minerals deal with the United States that could help bring peace to the country. The agreement requires Ukraine to pay 50% of its proceeds from future monetization of its mineral resources. President Putin expressed openness to granting the United States access to rare earths in both Russia and occupied Ukraine. After the break, you're going to hear from Furaha. Again, she's originally from the Congo, and she has a pulse on what's happening in her country. We're going to discuss the current conflict. We're going to discuss China's involvement. We're going to hear her story and why we all should pay attention to this issue. You're listening to The Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Don't leave the table.
Hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne Guy, and this is the Church's Moment. There is an incredible opportunity to start a distinct pro-life ministry at your church. We started one at our church about 5 years ago, and the fruit has been tangibly beautiful. We do monthly meetings that educate and equip the body of believers on sanctity of human life issues from womb to tomb by bringing in and featuring different pro-life leaders from all over Georgia, as well as featuring different ministries like post-abortion healing ministries or foster care ministries. There are so many great community partners out there. And then the second part of this pro-life ministry is having a care team. This is an opportunity to show moms in crisis, moms in unplanned, unwanted, or crisis pregnancies that the church is the place to run to, that the church is a safe haven and a place to go for tangible help, real hope, true compassion, friendship, and discipleship. And yes, an opportunity to share the gospel in both word and deed. Brothers and sisters in Christ, will you consider starting a distinct pro-life ministry at your church? It's so easy. Please contact me today to find out how simple this is. You can contact me at my email, proverbs318@att.net. This is the Church's Moment.
Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned for family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic is the war in the Congo. I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend Furaha Mussanzi. She's a passionate community activist and advocates for social justice. Originally from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Furaha moved to Bradford 22 years ago as a refugee. She holds a master's in African peace and conflict studies and has dedicated her energy to managing the Millside Center, supporting vulnerable individuals like refugees and domestic violence victims. Currently, she serves as the pastoral care leader at the Light Church. Driven by her deep Christian faith, Furaha engages as a speaker and a storyteller to highlight the injustices faced by her community. She is also a talented singer and songwriter with a debut album set to release in June of 2025. Join us as we delve into her inspiring journey and impactful work. First of all, let's just start with the light conversation, which is, what's special about the Congo? What's something we don't know that you would like to share?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me on here to share a little bit about my country. I absolutely love Congo. I am originally from Congo and grew up there as a child and moved to the UK at the age of 11. So I have very vivid memories of growing up in Congo. And it's funny, when you talk about Congo, the first thing people tell you is that it's a war zone. Whereas my memories of growing up in Congo is absolutely, completely the opposite. Yes, I did grow up in the war as well, but it's, I do remember just the green, lush town that I grew up in. It's incredibly beautiful, incredibly fertile. We had a very simple life in a very small town called Nyakunde in the eastern part of Congo, and we could grow our own produce. And I remember that's one of my fond memories of growing up in a place where you just had access to such an abundance of like fresh organic food, which I all obviously miss. But I think that's one thing that I love about my country. It's incredibly rich. You know, when we talk about the richness of Congo, it's literally in the soil, it's in the earth, it's in the food that people eat, and the hospitality that they have. And you know, Congolese people are one of the most resilient people I know. You know, with everything that they've gone through, they just always bounce back, always, you know, have cling on to hope. There's a phrase in French that says l'espoir fait vivre, which basically means in English translated, it translates to hope. Yeah, keeps us alive. And I think that's what I love about Congo. It's the people, it's the land, and there is something so deep about the land when you think about it, and connecting us to where we're from as a people. That the land itself has faced a lot of trials, which we'll get into soon, but it's incredibly one of the most picturesque places in the world. If you just, you know, look up Congo rainforest, you know, it's like the second largest rainforest in the world after the Amazon. You know, it's literally the second lung of the world. And you know, and unfortunately with you know, lots of trees being cut down, it's also that unfortunately it's affecting our country. But yes, I would say the beauty of the land and the beauty of the people and their resilience.
Hmm. I have to say, when I was doing research, that's what stood out to me was how beautiful it was. I was just like, oh my God, no wonder everyone is trying to pillage, so to speak, from this country because it is gorgeous. And I want to dive into the war that's happening today, but I kind of want to bring it back a little bit. Can you explain to me? What I think you said that your childhood was different. It wasn't like what we see now. What was your childhood like?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I was actually born in Rwanda, which is the neighboring country of Congo. My parents had gone there in the kind of early 90s because there was a lot of unemployment in my country. And so they both found work and they were being paid really well. So they made the shift in Rwanda, but they moved back to Congo just before the genocide in Rwanda. Which is obviously linked to the war in Congo. And so I have this my kind of identity crisis of where I really belong, because I've never actually been to the place where I was born. But when we moved back to Congo, my childhood was one of simplicity, I would say. My parents worked in a really small missionary hospital in like I said, a very small town, which probably had, I would say, a population of about 20,000, if that, very small. Everybody knew everyone. You could, you know, this whole sense of like just living in community was a part of my upbringing. You know, the African, I would say, the African the virtue of living together in unison. I'm sure you've heard of the term Ubuntu, where I am because you are, which just literally means that our humanity is connected, interconnected with one another. And so, you know, when one person grieves, I grieve because they're connected to who I am. So that was my kind of upbringing, very simple. And my parents would often bring people to live with us. You know, it was a very open door policy in our house. We always had random people who would live with us for months and sometimes years, and they just had this kind of sense of overflowing generosity with people around them. They had very little, but they constantly shared what they had with others, just living with that sense of like gratitude for what they had. I mean, fond memories of growing up is like we had like 5 mango trees around our house. So obviously, as a child, I remember climbing those mango trees and just sitting there under the sun and eating mangoes all day after school. And playing, the kind of abundance of playtime. And that's something that I think when we moved to the West, I realized that we miss that. Like, we don't really play as much as people back home, because even though we didn't have toys, we didn't have access to physical, the technological things that we have today, which we think is important. We literally would just run around and have the freedom to just explore in nature. And like I said, my parents from a young age taught us to learn how to grow our own food. And so you just had that, I guess that the simplicity of just appreciating what you had.
Love that. You mentioned what's happening here in the West, and we don't play like we used to. I'm a little bit older than you. I'll be 41 this year, and I was just thinking about how, as a child, I do remember playing. I do remember going outside. I do remember having friends. I didn't. Now, I wasn't one of those that played rough, but but I do remember us playing outside and not having technology in our face. And so
Mm,
now our young people are staring at technology all day long. And it's got to have a negative effect. But before we go deeper into the technology side, the mineral side,
mm,
I know a part of your story is that you were a refugee. And now I know, coming from Rwanda, considering the history of Rwanda and Zaire, the Congo, and all of that, what were you told about what happened in the 90s, or what happened during those wars?
yeah. So I mean, even though my childhood was beautiful, and I feel like my parents really shielded us from a young age from everything that was going on. But as I grew older, I stay older, I left Congo at 11. When I was around 5, 6, the civil war in Congo happened. So I vividly remember um us, the being living in a war, gunshots, people fleeing, carrying what we had. We had to physically leave our home to find safety at the age of 5. And so that's my first memory of war, is like just a, a pickup truck of soldiers literally stopping in front of our house, and they were recruiting child soldiers at the time. And um yeah, the fear of death was so real. And I remember running. This is the story I tell, when I go into schools and tell my story, running to my mum and telling her I didn't want to die, because even at that age I realized, oh, we may not make it. So that I, I didn't have to necessarily be told anything, because I was living in it. So even from a young age, when you experience war, you are forced to grow up so much quicker than other kids who are not exposed to that. So obviously would ask a lot of questions. I would ask my parents, why is it that we're living in such, precarious situation, and what was going on, and who these rebels were, and what they wanted. I was a very curious child, and I would always ask the questions. And obviously my parents, being wise, didn't tell me everything, because I couldn't really fathom it at the time. But even while we were in hiding, the play continued. So you'd find us still on the playground. But it's interesting, actually. The kind of play would be us pretending to be soldiers and trying to kill other people. So it's what I was exposed to actually then became how I would even experience play. So yeah, so I think that was the sporadic nature of kind of everything being stable, and then it wasn't, and then we'd have to run away and come back home. So it was very unsettling, and we spent a lot of time away from home and a lot of time in hiding. Now, there was a lot of tribal tension at the time. Obviously, the war that had happened in Rwanda, the genocide happened just after we left Rwanda. So we were just about made it out of Rwanda before that all happened. And I remember growing up in Congo, yeah, just so many times where um, the the soldiers would come, and a lot of it was also tribal tension, I should mention. So there was a civil war where, at the time, Mobutu, who was the president of Zaire, was being he was being, I guess, taken over by the next leader, which was Kabila, and so that's what caused kind of a huge uproar in Congo in the late 90s, which ended up being known as the First Congo War. And yeah, so it was very much part of my reality, even as a child, and I don't think I fully grasped what was going on. And so you'd hear stories of, loved ones going missing and your friends being killed, and it kind of was almost like surreal. But I don't think I fully understood or grieved that until I left Congo, much later.
I really, really hope that you're enjoying the discussion. And I always hate to interrupt, but we got to take a quick commercial break. You're listening to The Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, Extra 106.3. We'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne Guy, and this is the Church's Moment. There is an incredible opportunity to start a distinct pro-life ministry at your church. We started one at our church about 5 years ago, and the fruit has been tangibly beautiful. We do monthly meetings that educate and equip the body of believers on sanctity of human life issues from womb to tomb by bringing in and featuring different pro-life leaders from all over Georgia, as well as featuring different ministries like post-abortion healing ministries or foster care ministries. There are so many great community partners out there. And then the second part of this pro-life ministry is having a care team. This is an opportunity to show moms in crisis, moms in unplanned, unwanted, or crisis pregnancies, that the church is the place to run to, that the church is a safe haven and a place to go for tangible help, real hope, true compassion, friendship, and discipleship, and yes, an opportunity to share the gospel in both word and deed. Brothers and sisters in Christ, will you consider starting a distinct pro-life ministry at your church? It's so easy. Please contact me today to find out how simple this is. You can contact me at my email, proverbs318@att.net. This is the Church's Moment.
This is the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3, where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And if you're joining us for the first time, don't worry. You can catch an encore episode tomorrow at 9 a.m. right here on Extra 106.3. And remember, our podcast drops every Tuesday wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling eager, you can watch the video podcast right now on YouTube. Just remember to subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble pages, and your likes, comments, and shares are always welcomed. Now grab a seat and let's get back to the table. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today our table topic is the war in the Congo. So I'm going to bring you back into my discussion with Furaha Mussanzi, who is giving us all the information and deep diving into why this is a topic that we should care about here in America. No, I'm glad that you're sharing some of these details, because we see things through documentaries, we see pictures and things of that nature over here, but we haven't lived through it, we haven't witnessed it. And there's something you said that really stood out to me, which was the young people, the young kids that have to grow up so fast when you are living under that type of oppression. And when I was watching a documentary, I saw a child that looked like he had to have been no more than 4 or 5, maybe that age.
Wow.
And they had a little younger sibling walking with them, and he's kind of like helping the younger sibling, and I mean, just doing things that you don't see other younger kids doing here. And so that stood out to me when you made that statement. Could you, I would love it if you could share, just from your perspective, what is the message that you want to convey as it relates to where the Congo is today? Because it feels like they've been in war for pretty much the existence
Mm,
of this country. And so I just want to make sure I understand and that my audience fully understands what's happening today in the Congo.
mm. Yeah, well, what's happening in the Congo right now is that in January, the M23 rebel groups, so this is one of dozens of rebel groups who exist in the Eastern Congo alone, they threatened to take over Goma, and then they did. Goma is a very strategic uh, trading um, town in the eastern part of Congo. Yeah, the place where a lot of vital trading, transport happens, and it's also close to a lot of the mining towns. And they also took over Bukavu, which is again the second largest town in that region in Kivu. So yeah, it's been a really scary time because Congo, even though there's been a lot of threats in the past, they threatened to take over Goma. It didn't quite happen, and the UN, are based in that region. So people thought, oh, this was not really going to happen, but unfortunately, it did. And so currently, Goma is going through. There is, just over 8,000 people have been killed in the last. In the last 3 months, and millions of people have been displaced. The humanitarian crisis, I think that's what hits me. It's the fact that people in Congo are living in the most horrific conditions in refugee camps in their own countries. And oftentimes we talk about migration, we talk about, why are people leaving? And it's when your home is not safe, you do anything and everything to make sure you save your life. And oftentimes in war zones, people end up being displaced in their own land. They don't even make it outside of the country. And so in Goma alone, there's, hundreds and thousands of people living in refugee camps with no water, very little access to water, food supplies, and obviously diseases of the kind of disease that would just is killing people. There's lots of humanitarian organizations on the ground, like the UN, trying to do what they can, the Red Cross, but it is actually it's like living in a horror film. So my older sister, this hits close to home because my older sister, two of my sisters are in Congo, but one of my older sisters is currently in Goma. So for 5 days when the war started, we didn't have access to her because they shut down the internet. There was no running water or food, so people were literally stuck indoors for days. And so it was very scary being so far away from there, not knowing whether they were alive or not, and then finally hearing their voice over the phone, and the stories of her kids, who are, the youngest is 3 years old, and the trauma that they're experiencing. And I think for me it was more of it was a re-traumatizing experience, thinking, oh goodness, like my parents are in their 70s and they grew up during the colonial period, and they've faced a lot of hardship, and we grew up in the war, and the next generation are still growing up and experiencing violence and war and being terrorized by this rebel group. But I think what we have to understand is behind the rebel group is the key thing is they're after the resources that exist in Congo. And coltan and cobalt are one of the key minerals that we in the West benefit from on a daily basis. Our phones or electronic devices that we have, over 70% of these minerals come from Congo, and oftentimes they're mined illegally, or they're not actually it's the rebel groups that actually own these mines. But behind the rebel groups are multinational companies who are then profiting and getting billions, and basically getting all the profit for the whilst people on the ground are actually suffering, and people on the ground are facing horrendous humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, let's break that down a little bit, because I don't think our audience, and I know people here in America have no clue about how our electronics are actually working. So in most cases, I
Mm,
think we just turn it on and we think that that's just, electricity, right? But
mm,
there are minerals associated with all of our electronics. You mentioned coltan, we mentioned cobalt, but your country is not just rich in those minerals as well. I mean, it's diamonds, gold,
yeah.
tin, lithium. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So it's amazing. It's actually fascinating that a country that is so rich in
Mm,
minerals that are used all across the globe,
yeah.
yet the people are porous, and it makes
Mm,
no sense to me. Now, these rebel groups that are guarding these mines, you're saying that they're connected to businesses. How does that happen?
right.
How is this occurring? And
Mm.
I'm really confused about that part of it.
Yeah. Well, I think the easiest way to understand this is to look at who is sponsoring them. Because unless we understand who's sponsoring the rebel groups, we won't really understand where the kind of supply chain starts from. And so for me, I think of there's multiple reports, including the UN, who've talked about how Rwanda are the ones who are backing M23 rebel groups. Now, why is that important? I think that's important because when you actually look at Rwanda, Rwanda's an incredibly beautiful country, and it has gone through a lot of its own challenges, recovering from the genocide and doing really well. But unfortunately, the reality is Rwanda is actually now known as one of um, the biggest exporters of coltan and cobalt. And now, if you look at their Rwanda does not have any of those minerals in their actual earth. So you're thinking, well, let's do the maths. If they don't have cobalt or coltan or all these minerals, well, where are they getting it from? And how are they the ones now getting all the profit? Being the first ones to export it. The thing with Congo is because it's such a failed state, and because it's such a broken society, and because it's such a huge country, it's the size of Western Europe. Like, I think people to kind of wrap your mind around this, you have to really get Congo is the second largest country in Africa. It's neighboring by 8 countries. So Rwanda's only one of them. And because it's so unstable, the border is so porous, anyone can come in and out and do anything. As long as you have money and you have access to a gun, you can do pretty much anything within reasons, obviously. But I think
Yeah.
so Rwanda backing the rebel groups because they're profiting. There are specific, most of these mines now, there are small airfields that they don't even need to go through kind of roads. They just grab what they need and it goes next door, and they deal with what they deal with and export it out. So this is what's actually going on. This is a reality. And obviously, I'm sure you've seen Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, being interviewed, and he's denying knowing whether his country is supporting the rebel groups, but it's so evident. Even some of the people who are being found to be a part of the rebel groups who actually are in Goma right now, most of them don't even speak Congolese languages. So you're thinking, well, where are these people, young people, coming from? They barely even understand the basic language in Congo. So they're not Congolese people. Of course, some of the Congolese people are also being integrated into the army because, yes, there's a lot of high unemployment. And when young men are doing nothing and there's an opportunity to gain a little profit here and there, they join the army because what else do they do? So I'm not saying that all of the army are from Rwanda, but the majority of them are, or they're being backed by Rwanda for their own gain. I think that's one of the ways of understanding it. And obviously beyond that, even when you look at the cobalt crisis, is the most of those who are the companies that are controlling the mines in the kind of southern region of Congo is actually Chinese companies. So what we see is now neo-colonialism. Now Chinese companies are the ones who are physically on the ground, and oftentimes they'll only send one representative or a few, but they will use local people to be their dealers. To do their dirty work, and that's what multinational companies do. They won't physically be on the ground, it's not like Apple will say, yes, we are one of the people that are, we use conflict minerals in our, latest iPhone. And of course they're not going to say that. But what they will do is use people on the ground to get what they need. And therefore, it's so on the kind of on the face of it, it's very clean energy. It's everything is, it's safe, but is it? And I think as consumers, in the West, we're so we need to be so careful to I think we need to stop being ignorant and realizing that so many luxury things that we have is there is always on the other side of that thing that you have there's exploitation going on and we have to be able to do our own research and challenge the system and say, do you know what, I don't want to be a part of this. I think one of the ways I always tell people, sorry if I'm jumping the gun here, but is one of the ways you can be an activist in this fight for raising awareness about the situation in Congo is to realize that you have a piece of Congo in your pocket. If you have a phone, you have a piece of Congo. If you have an iPhone, if you fly, you travel around the world, all these airlines, the latest AI is the next thing. Batteries are needed to make so many things that we have in our homes function. And so why not use the very things that you're benefiting from in Congo to also share what's going on and actually say you don't need new iPhones every year. Use what you have until it dies.
I totally agree.
Mm,
I am not a fan of iPhones. I am an Android girl, and I cannot stand when it starts slowing down to try to force me to get a new phone because it always feels like it's too soon. And
yeah.
and you're right. We are very materialistic here because we're consumers.
Uh-huh.
And I always say that, while I love my country, I'm grateful for America, and I'm grateful for the peace that we have, or that it appears that we have. We do need to wake up as a society. We need to
Mm,
pay attention to what's happening globally and how it connects to us. I think a lot of times we just disconnect from it, right? It's like, oh, that's happening
mm,
over there, and
yeah.
that's not necessarily happening to me. But if everyone's phone all of a sudden stopped working, then
Right.
I think we'll start paying attention. And it kind of reminds me of when I would say about a decade ago, when it all kind of was exposed about what was happening with diamonds, right? And the whole
Mm,
blood diamond came out and all that stuff, and it showed us what was really happening in order
right.
to get diamonds.
Mm,
And I know it really did something to my generation, because I know our generation are the generation now where they're into the lab grown diamonds now. They're into moissanite and just not
yeah.
really trying to purchase
Yeah.
diamonds because of
Yeah.
that. Um,
Mm,
so I'm hoping that this conversation, other conversations, are going to kind of spearhead people waking up to what's happening
mm,
with other minerals. So, as from your perspective and the work that you're doing, how are or maybe I should ask, why is it that the government doesn't see taking care of their people, even on a basic level, as
mm,
beneficial to in this fight? I'm confused about where is the Congolese government. Is it now just completely ran by Rwandans and that are anti helping the people, or what's
mm,
happening there?
mm. Yeah, no, honestly, that's one of the biggest bemusement of this whole thing because the Congolese government is so I guess again going back to the point of how big Congo is, the Congolese government are nowhere to be seen. The war in the east is almost happening like it's in a different country. And the capital is, I guess, 2,000 miles away from there. So it's very far. And so in order for them, the government to even control what's going on in the East, it's impossible. I think even now, the army, Congolese army are underfunded. They're not trained. They're not invested in. So as soon as M23 Rebel came in, they were running because they didn't have all the ammunition to even fight. So this is how weak the Congolese state is, unfortunately. Now, the president himself appears to be trying to do something to help, seize the war. He's currently, in Qatar with the Rwandan government going through a peace talk to try and bring this whole thing to a halt. But I think for me, I think the Congolese government are part of the problem because they don't fully they don't do enough to actually safeguard their people, to protect their locals, and also even to respond to the crisis that's going on. It's those who are on the ground are international companies. It's the UN, it's the Red Cross, it's the people who have to fly in to help those who are in need. Now, Congo is incredibly rich, as we've just said. Now, Congo should be one of the richest countries in the world with all of these minerals, which is worth over trillion, like 30, 40 trillions of dollars. And that's minerals alone. And, so you think if we had strong leaders, if we had leaders who actually understood how vital leadership is to utilize these minerals to then, advance the country, Congo would be so far. But unfortunately, the mismanagement of the funds and Congolese people themselves being the ones who are giving the deals to the dealers, what they get is it goes straight in their pocket. So the money itself is not actually used to enrich the Congolese people and help them to come out of poverty, to come out of war and violence. Instead of progressing, we're regressing day by day, which is really, really sad.
Well, I mean, if you look at you know, corruption is guaranteed if there's a weak government, right? Um,
Absolutely.
red tape, bureaucracy, it's going to lead to corruption. And it's funny because I look at it I look at it a little different than I did prior to really doing research because
Mm,
there was a time where people would just say, particularly we hear this when it comes to Nigerians, right? They'll say, "Oh,
mm,
the Nigerians are doing these things, and doing stuff under the table or whatever." But I was listening to someone who was from Senegal, and she
mm,
was talking about how, whenever if I'm trying to start a business, but you're charging me $100 for a
mm,
notary, and then you tell me I have to get every page notarized. Of course, there's going to be under the table deals happening, right? I mean, you
mm.
kind of force the people to have to
Yeah,
figure out how to be their own government,
yeah.
and that's always a problem.
Mm,
So I definitely see the cycle of abuse, and it almost feels like, or would you say that the Congolese government is reaping benefits from just kind of staying out of it? Do you think that they're being paid off to a certain degree?
um, that's a good. I mean, I think for me personally, I just think it's the Congolese government itself is they're just puppets of these of Western governments, because we have to realize that the West has always benefited from African countries and developing countries because of these minerals that they have in their countries. And for me, I think the we can't really disconnect what's going on in Congo with global politics, because I think that that's one of the key things that's happening behind the scene in my mind, because when you look back at the early 60s, when Congo finally gained independence after the colonial period, and we had our first prime minister, Patrice Lumumba, who most people have probably heard of. He came onto, in power, and he said he had this passion for his country, and he said, I will do anything to protect Congolese minerals and Congolese riches to remain in this country to benefit the people. Within a year, he was assassinated. And that's actually linked to even the politics in America, because the CIA were involved in
I didn't
killing
know that.
Patrice Lumumba. So look up that history. And
Mm.
so when we've had strong men come onto the scene and decide that they would do anything to protect the people, to help Congo move forward, they never go far. So there is a lot of that happening on the ground, where we have great leaders who come onto the scene who have a genuine desire to help Congolese people. They do not make it far, and they get so many opposition. Even when it comes to election, they face a lot of abuse, you know. It's really sad, and so it actually then it discourages people to even think change will ever come, because even those who dream to want to do something, you're going to sacrifice your life.
Once again, I have to interrupt the discussion, unfortunately, because we have to end the show. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation thus far. Go to my YouTube page where you can listen to the entire interview. Thank you once again for joining. Until next time, stay unafraid, stay unapologetic, and never stop seeking the truth. We'll see you next week.